The flashlight beam cut across the darkness like an accusation. "Get up. Now." Captain Raymond Holt's voice carried the particular contempt reserved for those he considered beneath the ground he protected. The beam settled on the figure slumped on the iron bench outside Arlington's main gates, illuminating a threadbare army field jacket faded to the color of old dust and a face weathered by years of sleeping in places not meant for sleeping. "Not here. Not today of all days. This is sacred ground, and you're not welcome on it." The old man's eyes opened slowly. They were sharp, those eyes, the color of weathered steel, and holding none of the confusion Holt expected from a vagrant roused at 4 in the morning. They tracked the flashlight, then the man behind it, then the 2 junior officers flanking him, all in a single measured sweep that seemed wrong somehow. Too precise, too practiced. "I will be gone when the gates open, sir." The voice was quiet, hoarse from disuse, but steady. "I'm just waiting." Holt laughed. The sound echoed off the iron gates behind him, off the white headstones barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness beyond. "Waiting, right? You know what I see every Memorial Day? A dozen men just like you, claiming you have someone inside, claiming you served, claiming you deserve to be here. And every single one of you is lying." The old man said nothing. He simply sat up slowly, his movements carrying an economy of motion that seemed out of place for a homeless man in his 70s. His hands, scarred across the knuckles and weathered to leather, rested on his knees. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He simply sat and waited, as if Holt's contempt was a weather pattern that would eventually pass. This particular silence enraged Holt more than any argument could have. He stepped closer, flashlight beam now directly in the old man's face. "Do you have any idea where you are? Do you have any idea what this place means? Heroes are buried behind these gates. Medal of Honor recipients. Men who gave everything. And you sit here in your surplus store costume, stinking up the air, pretending you belong?" The old man's hand moved slowly to his chest. Beneath the threadbare jacket, beneath a flannel shirt worn thin at the elbows, his fingers found something hanging against his skin. Metal, by the way his hand closed around it. When he spoke, his voice remained quiet, but something had shifted underneath it. Something that made the younger officer to Holt's left take an unconscious step backward. "I have someone inside, sir. I have been coming here for 15 years. I will wait until the gates open. Then I will visit him. Then I will leave. That is all I'm asking." Holt's face reddened in the darkness. 15 years. Sure. And I am the ghost of General Patton. He turned to his junior officers, making sure his voice carried. "This is what we are dealing with, gentlemen. This is what crawls out of the woodwork every Memorial Day. Men who never serve a day in their lives, who never sacrificed anything, who think a torn jacket and a sad story entitles them to trespass on federal property." The old man's eyes closed briefly. In that moment, in the darkness behind his eyelids, he was somewhere else entirely. A hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and blood. A hand growing cold in his grip. A voice already fading. "You get home, Shep. You get home and you live. That is an order." His eyes opened. The steel was still there, but now it was joined by something else. Something that looked almost like patience. The patience of a man who had waited through worse than this, who had endured longer nights than this one, who had survived things that would break men like Raymond Holt into pieces. Wherever you are watching from right now, whatever bench you might be sitting on in your own life, let us know in the comments where you're joining us from. Because this story is about the people we walk past without seeing, the quiet legends hidden in plain sight, the men and women whose appearance tells you nothing about what they have carried, what they have lost, what they have survived. Holt was still talking, still performing for his audience of 2. "I want him gone before the families start arriving. I want him gone before anyone sees this disgrace sitting outside our gates on Memorial Day of all days." The old man reached into his jacket pocket. Both junior officers tensed, hands moving toward their belts. But what emerged was not a weapon. It was a photograph, laminated, worn soft at the edges from years of handling. The old man looked at it for a long moment. 2 faces in the image. One was his own, decades younger, wearing desert camouflage and a tired smile. The other was a young black sergeant with a grin that seemed to light up even this faded, worn photograph. They stood in front of a mud-walled compound, mountains rising behind them, looking like men who had no idea what was coming. The old man's thumb traced the second face. His lips moved, forming words too quiet for Holt to hear. Then he tucked the photograph back into his pocket, next to the worn paperback book that had lived there for 15 years, and looked up at the captain with those steel-colored eyes. "I will be here when the gates open, sir. You can do what you need to do. But I will not leave before I see him." Holt's hand shot out and grabbed the old man's shoulder, fingers digging into the threadbare fabric. "Then we will see about that, will we not? I am calling this in. Trespassing. Possible mental health hold. By the time the sun comes up, you will be in a cell instead of on this bench." He released the shoulder with a shove and turned toward the security station, already reaching for his radio. The two junior officers followed, though one of them glanced back over his shoulder. Something about the way the old man held himself. Something about those eyes. What none of them knew, what no one at Arlington National Cemetery knew on that cold Memorial Day morning, was that in 6 hours, Captain Raymond Holt would be standing at attention with tears streaming down his face. In 6 hours, the man he had just shoved would be saluted by a 3-star general. In 6 hours, everything Raymond Holt thought he knew about service, about sacrifice, about the men who sleep on benches, would be shattered beyond repair. But for now, in the darkness before dawn, the old man simply sat. His hand found the dog tags beneath his shirt. Not one set, but two. The second set wrapped in electrical tape to keep them silent. He held them both against his chest and whispered words meant for someone who could no longer hear them. "Almost there, brother. One more year. One more visit. And I'm still here. Still trying. Just like you ordered." The gates of Arlington National Cemetery stood silent in the darkness. Behind them, in Section 60, Row 14, a white headstone waited. And on the bench outside, a man who had once been called Shepherd settled in to wait for morning. He had waited through worse. He had survived longer nights. He could survive this one too. He always did, even when part of him wished he had not. The cold iron of the bench pressed against his back, and Ezra Whitmore let his eyes close. Not to sleep. He had not truly slept in 15 years. But to remember, to let the darkness behind his eyelids carry him back to the place he visited every night whether he wanted to or not. March 2007. Khyber Province. The mountains rising like broken teeth against a sky that had not yet learned to lighten. His team moving through the valley in the darkness before dawn. 8 men who had done this 100 times before. Staff Sergeant Hernandez on point. Sergeant Doyle covering their 6. And Toby, always Toby, Sergeant First Class Tobias Okonkwo, moving beside Ezra like a shadow, that ridiculous grin visible even in the green glow of night vision. "You ever think about what you're going to do when this is over, Shep?" Toby's voice had been barely a whisper, but Ezra could still hear it now, 15 years later, as clearly as if his brother were sitting beside him on this bench. "I am thinking maybe I open a restaurant. Soul food. The real stuff like the foster mom in Detroit used to make before they moved me again." Ezra had laughed quietly. "You cannot even boil water without burning it. That is why I hire people, Shep. I provide the vision, the dream. Someone else provides the actual cooking." The memory fractured, splintered into the sound of automatic weapons fire that still echoed in Ezra's skull when the nights got too quiet. Hernandez going down first. Then Doyle. The muzzle flashes from positions they had cleared twice. The RPG that came screaming out of a window and detonated 6 feet from where Ezra stood. He remembered the shrapnel, the way it tore through his right side and left leg like fire made solid, the way the ground came up to meet him, the way his rifle suddenly weighed more than he could lift. And then Toby's face above him, that grin gone now, replaced by something fierce and desperate. "Stay with me, Shep. Stay with me. I'm getting you out." The first bullet hit Toby in the shoulder as he dragged Ezra toward cover. He did not stop. The second caught him in the thigh. He stumbled, but kept moving. The third and fourth came almost together, chest and abdomen, and still Tobias Okonkwo did not stop. He dragged his brother behind a collapsed wall and pressed a hand against the wounds in Ezra's side and looked at him with eyes that already knew the truth. "Do not you die on me, Shep. That is an order." And then he was gone, back into the fire, back toward the machine gun position that was cutting them apart. Ezra had screamed after him, screamed until his throat tore, but Toby did not look back. He moved through that kill zone like a man who had already made his peace with God, grenades in both hands. And when a machine gun finally went silent, when the last explosion echoed off the valley walls, Tobias Okonkwo collapsed in the dust with a fifth bullet in his spine. Ezra opened his eyes. The darkness of the Kinner Valley was gone, replaced by the darkness of a Virginia morning. His hands were shaking. They always shook when he let himself remember. He pressed them flat against his knees and forced himself to breathe. 3 days. Toby had lived for 3 days after that. 3 days in a hospital at Bagram. Machines breathing for him, tubes running in and out of his broken body. Ezra had refused to leave his side, had held his hand through every hour of those 3 days, willing his brother to fight, to survive, to keep that promise they had made to each other years ago. "We go home together, Shep. Both of us. That is the deal." But Toby had not gone home. On the 3rd day, in the gray hour before dawn, his hand had grown cold in Ezra's grip. His eyes had opened one last time, finding Ezra's face with a clarity that should not have been possible. "You get home, Shep. You get home and you live. That is an order." The machines had screamed. The doctors had rushed in, and Ezra had sat there, still holding that cold hand, feeling something inside himself crack and crumble into dust. The funeral at Arlington had been beautiful. Full honors. The flag folded with geometric precision and presented to no one, because Toby had no family. No one except Ezra and the wife and daughter waiting at home. Ezra had taken the flag, had stood at attention while the rifles fired and the bugle played and the casket descended into the earth. Had stood there long after everyone else had gone, staring at the fresh dirt, feeling the weight of a promise he did not know how to keep. You get home and you live. He had tried. God, he had tried. But every time he looked at his wife, he saw Toby's face. Every time his daughter laughed, he heard the sound of his brother's voice. Every time someone asked him how he was doing, he felt the shrapnel scars pull tight and remembered that he was only alive because a better man had died. The unraveling had been slow at first, then faster. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped being present even when he was sitting in the same room as his family. His wife had begged him to get help. His daughter, only 8 years old, had crawled into his lap one night and asked why Daddy was so sad all the time. He had left 3 months later. A note on the kitchen table. "I love you. I am sorry. Live your lives. Do not look for me." He had not deserved their love, had not deserved their warmth, had not deserved to sit in a comfortable home and eat warm meals and sleep in a soft bed while Toby rotted in the ground. The streets were penance. The cold was penance. The hunger and the loneliness and the slow erasure of everything he had once been. All of it was penance for surviving when he should have died. For 15 years, he had lived this way. For 15 years, the only appointment he kept was this one. Memorial Day, the bench outside Arlington. First through the gates when they opened. First to Section 60, Row 14. First to kneel before the white headstone and tell his brother that he was still here. Still trying. Still keeping the only part of that order he knew how to keep. A light clicked on in the security station across the parking lot. Ezra watched his whole silhouette move behind the window. Phone pressed to his ear, gesturing angrily. Calling it in, just like he had promised. By the time the sun came up, there would be police here. Maybe an ambulance. Maybe men with forms and questions, and that particular look they got when they saw another broken veteran who had fallen through every crack the system had to offer. It did not matter. Ezra had survived worse than Raymond Holt. Had survived longer nights than this one. Had survived the thing that killed him 15 years ago in a hospital room at Bagram when the hand he was holding went cold. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the worn paperback. Marcus Aurelius. Meditations. The cover was soft as cloth from years of handling. He opened it to a random page, tilting the book to catch the distant glow of the security station lights. Toby's handwriting filled the margins. Notes and underlines and small drawings. A conversation with a dead man preserved in ink. One passage was circled 3 times. Ezra did not need light to read it. He had memorized it years ago. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you'll find strength. His fingers traced Toby's handwriting. The familiar loops and scratches. The small star drawn in the corner. Still here, brother, Ezra whispered. Dawn was coming. The sky above Arlington had begun to lighten at its edges. Still trying. In the security station, Holt finished his call and stared out the window at the old man on the bench. Disgust twisted his features. He had no idea that in 5 hours, everything he thought he knew would be proven wrong. He had no idea that the man he had called a disgrace was worth more than every medal in his display case. But the morning was coming, and with it, the truth. The morning shift arrived at Arlington National Cemetery in a procession of headlights cutting through the gray dawn. Groundskeepers and administrators and junior security officers, all of them carrying coffee cups and the particular weariness of people who had drawn the holiday shift. They parked in the staff lot and walked toward the main building, and one by one, they noticed the commotion at the gates. Captain Holt stood in the center of the parking lot like a general marshaling his forces. His voice carried across the pavement, loud enough for everyone to hear, theatrical in its outrage. We have a situation, people. Homeless individual on the bench. Claims he has someone buried inside. Refused to leave when I gave him a direct order. The staff gathered around him, some curious, some annoyed at the disruption to their morning routine. A few glanced toward the bench where the old man sat motionless, his threadbare jacket a smudge of faded green against the iron. I have seen 100 men like him, Holt continued. Every Memorial Day, they crawl out of whatever hole they have been living in and show up here with their sob stories. Stolen valor, every single one of them. Men who never served a day looking for sympathy and handouts. A young groundskeeper named Marcus Webb stood at the edge of the group, coffee cup cooling in his hands. He was 23 years old, had done 2 years as an Army cook at Fort Hood before getting out, and something about the captain's words sat wrong in his stomach. He had seen the old man before. 3 Memorial Days now. Always on that same bench. Always waiting for the gates to open. Always first to a grave in Section 60 that Marcus had noticed him visiting. He never asked for anything, Marcus said quietly. The words came out before he could stop them. Holt's head snapped toward him. Excuse me? Marcus felt the weight of every eye on him and wished he had kept his mouth shut. I just meant I have seen him before. Every Memorial Day. He just waits for the gates to open, visits a grave, and leaves. He never bothers anyone. Holt's expression could have curdled milk. And you did not think to report a repeat trespasser? You did not think that maybe, just maybe, this was something your supervisor should know about? He is not trespassing, sir. He waits outside the gates until they open to the public. That is not against any regulation I know of. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Holt took a step toward Marcus, his voice dropping to something more dangerous than shouting. Are you telling me how to do my job, Mr. Webb? No, sir. I was just observing that he has never caused any trouble. Well, he's causing trouble now. Holt turned back to the group, dismissing Marcus with a contemptuous wave. I want 2 officers on him at all times. The moment the gates open, he does not go inside. He goes into custody. Trespassing, disorderly conduct, whatever we can make stick. I want this handled before the families start arriving. The group dispersed, most of them heading to their stations, a few throwing curious glances toward the bench. Marcus lingered, watching the old man. There was something about the way he held himself. Something about those eyes when they had briefly met Marcus's across the parking lot. He had seen that look before in the old sergeants who came through the mess hall at Hood. Men who had been places and done things that left marks invisible to anyone who had not been there too. Across the parking lot, in the administration building, a woman named Delphine Marchand was pouring her first cup of coffee when she heard the commotion through the window. She was 58 years old, retired sergeant major, now working as a civilian cemetery administrator. She had taken this job because she wanted to spend her final working years among the honored dead, tending to the place where so many of her brothers and sisters had come to rest. She watched Holt's performance through the window and felt a familiar disgust rise in her throat. She had known men like Raymond Holt throughout her career, men who wore proximity to heroes like a medal they had not earned, men who spoke of sacrifice without understanding what the word meant. Her eyes drifted to the bench, the old man sitting there, motionless, patient. Something about his silhouette triggered a memory she could not quite grasp. The way he held his shoulders, the way his head tracked movement around him without appearing to move at all. She had seen that before, somewhere, in someone. The memory slipped away like water through fingers. She shook her head and turned back to her desk. There was work to do. Memorial Day was the busiest day of the year, and she did not have time to chase ghosts. Outside, Holt was approaching the bench again. This time he brought an audience. 2 junior officers flanked him, and a small crowd of staff watched from a distance. His voice pitched to carry, to perform, to make sure everyone witnessed his authority. I thought I made myself clear. The captain stopped 3 feet from Ezra, hands on his hips. You're not welcome here. You are a disgrace to this place and everyone buried in it. Ezra looked up slowly. His steel-colored eyes moved from Holt to the officers beside him to the crowd beyond. He took in the scene the way a man takes in a battlefield, calculating distances, noting positions, old habits that never truly died. I mean no disrespect, sir. His voice was quiet but clear in the morning air. I only want to visit a grave. That is all. 1 visit. Then I will go. Agrave. Holt laughed, the sound harsh and theatrical. Let me guess. Your father, your brother, maybe a war buddy from whatever fantasy you have constructed in your head. Ezra's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. My brother. Yes, right? And what was this brother's name? What unit did he serve in? Or did he fight? Holt leaned closer, his voice dropping to a sneer. Go ahead. Make something up. I have heard every lie in the book. The old man's hand moved to his chest, finding the dog tags beneath his shirt. When he spoke, his voice had changed. Something harder underneath it now. Something that made the junior officer on the left shift his weight backward. His name was Tobias Okonkwo, Sergeant First Class, 5th Special Forces Group. He died in Khyber Province, Afghanistan, on March 17, 2007. His grave is in Section 60, Row 14, and I have visited him every Memorial Day for 15 years. The name hung in the air. Holt's expression flickered, something uncertain crossing his features before the sneer returned. Tobias Okonkwo. He repeated the name like he was testing it. And I'm supposed to just believe that, am I? Believe that you knew a Medal of Honor recipient? Ezra's eyes locked on Holt's. The steel in them had turned to something colder, something that made the watching crowd go very still. I did not say he received the Medal of Honor, sir. I said he died. Ezra's voice was barely above a whisper now, but it carried across the silent parking lot like thunder. How did you know about the medal? Holt's face went pale for just a moment, then red, then pale again. His mouth opened and closed, searching for words that would not come. Behind him, Marcus Webb watched with growing certainty that something was very wrong here, that the captain had just made a mistake he did not yet understand. And in the administration building, Delphine Marchand had frozen at her window. She had heard the name, Tobias Okonkwo, a name she knew, a name connected to a Silver Star citation she had typed herself 18 years ago for a man whose call sign she had heard whispered over the radio during the longest night of her career. Her coffee cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, but she was already moving toward the door. The name Tobias Okonkwo echoed in Ezra's skull like a bell that would not stop ringing. He had not spoken that name aloud to a stranger in years, had not offered it up for judgment or disbelief. The name was sacred, private, a prayer he whispered only to headstones and empty rooms and the darkness behind his closed eyes. But Holt had known about the medal, had known without being told, and that knowledge, that single slip, had cracked something open inside Ezra that he had spent 15 years trying to keep sealed. He remembered the day they met. Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Summer of 2001. Ezra had been a staff sergeant then, already on his second tour with 5th Special Forces Group, already carrying the quiet confidence of a man who had proven himself in places most Americans would never know existed. Toby had been fresh out of the qualification course, 23 years old, all coiled energy and that impossible grin. They had been assigned to the same ODA, Operational Detachment Alpha, 12 men who would become closer than brothers over the years that followed. But from the first day, something had clicked between Ezra and Toby. A recognition, a kinship that went deeper than shared missions or matching patches. Toby had grown up in foster care, bounced between 11 homes before aging out of the system at 18. No family, no roots, no one waiting for him anywhere. He had joined the Army because it was the only place that had ever wanted him, and he had fought his way into Special Forces because he needed to prove he was worth something. Ezra had seen that hunger in him, that desperate need to belong, and he had done something he rarely did. He had opened his door. The first Thanksgiving, Ezra had brought Toby home. His wife, Maria, had set an extra place at the table without being asked. His daughter, Sophia, for years old and fearless, had climbed into Toby's lap before dessert and declared that he was her new uncle. Toby had looked at Ezra across the table with something shining in his eyes that might have been tears. "This okay, Shep?" His voice had been rough. "Me being here?" Ezra had not hesitated. "You're family now. That is not a question. That is just how it is." After that, there had been no separating them. Every holiday, every birthday, every deployment, and every homecoming, Maria started calling Toby her second husband as a joke, but there was truth underneath it. He was woven into their family so completely that Sophia could not remember a time before Uncle Toby. The memories came faster now, flooding through the cracks that Holt's words had opened. Toby teaching Sophia to ride a bike in the driveway. Toby burning pancakes on Sunday mornings and laughing about it. Toby sitting on the back porch with Ezra after the hard deployments. Neither of them talking, just existing together in the silence that only brothers understood. And then the memory that lived in the center of all the others. The one Ezra could not escape no matter how many miles he walked or how many cold nights he endured. The hospital epigram. The machines breathing for what was left of Tobias, Okonkwo. The doctors saying words like catastrophic and irreversible and comfort measures. Ezra had not left that room for 3 days. Had not eaten. Had not slept. Had just sat there holding Toby's hand, talking to him about everything and nothing, telling him about the restaurant he was going to open someday. The soul food place. The one with the good biscuits. "You're going to make it, Toby. You hear me? You're going to make it because you promised. We go home together. Both of us. That is the deal." But Toby had not made it. On the third morning, just as the sun was coming up over the mountains, his eyes had opened. Clear, focused, finding Ezra's face with an intensity that should not have been possible. "Shep." The word had been barely a breath. "Listen to me. I am here, brother. I am right here. You get home." Toby's cold fingers had tightened around Ezra's with strength that came from somewhere beyond the broken body. "You get home and you live. You hear me? That is an order. Toby, do not talk like that. You're coming with me. You're going to open that restaurant and burn all those pancakes and teach Sophia to drive someday. You're going to be there." But Toby had just smiled. That same grin he had worn the day they met. Tired now. Fading. But still there. "Take care of them, Shep. Maria. Sophia. They are your family. And tell Sophia her Uncle Toby loved her more than anything in the whole world." The machines had started screaming. Alarms and codes and doctors rushing in. But Ezra had not moved. Had not let go of that hand even as it went cold. Had not looked away from those eyes even as the light behind them flickered and dimmed and finally went out. Tobias Okonkwo died at 0547 on March 17, 2007. He was 29 years old. He had no family except the one that had chosen him. And the man who had chosen him, the man who had called him brother, sat beside his body for 6 more hours before anyone could convince him to leave. On the bench outside Arlington, Ezra realized his face was wet. He raised a trembling hand and touched the tears he had not felt falling. 15 years. 15 years of holding it together. 15 years of not breaking down in front of strangers. And now this captain, this small man with his small cruelties, had cracked the seal with a single careless word. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and looked up. Holt was still standing there, still red-faced, still searching for a response to the question Ezra had asked. The crowd behind him had grown larger. More staff arriving for the morning shift. More witnesses to whatever was about to happen. And coming across the parking lot, moving faster than her age should have allowed, was a woman Ezra did not recognize. But something about the way she carried herself. Something about the set of her shoulders and the purpose in her stride. She looked like someone who had just remembered something important. Something that changed everything. Ezra watched her approach. His hand found the dog tag beneath his shirt. Both sets, his and Toby's, resting together against his heart. "Still here, brother," he whispered. "Whatever comes next. Still here." Delphine Marchand had not run in years. Her knees complained about stairs. Her doctor had opinions about her blood pressure. But she was running now, or something close to it, her sensible shoes slapping against the pavement as she crossed the parking lot toward the commotion at the gates. The name kept echoing in her head. Tobias Okonkwo. She had typed that name into a citation 18 years ago, had processed the paperwork that turned a dead sergeant into a Medal of Honor recipient, had read the after-action reports so many times she could still recite them from memory. But it was not the dead man's name that had sent her coffee cup shattering to the floor. It was the other name, the one she had not heard spoken aloud in almost 2 decades, the one attached to the Silver Star citation she had typed on the same day. Staff Sergeant Ezra Whitmore. Call sign Shepard. She remembered him now. Not his face. Faces blurred together after 30 years of service. But his voice. That voice on the radio during the longest night of her career. Calm and steady while the world exploded around him. Calling in coordinates and casualty reports with the precision of a man reading a weather forecast. "Shepard, this is Overwatch. Confirm your position. Confirm number of casualties." And his response, crackling through static and gunfire. "Overwatch, Shepard. Position is grid reference 34986 event. 2 Kia. 3 wounded, 1 critical. I am holding. Repeat, I am holding. Do not send anyone else into this valley until I clear the ridge." He had held that position for 6 hours. Alone, with shrapnel in his side and his best friend bleeding out behind a collapsed wall. He had killed 11 enemy combatants with a rifle and, when the rifle ran dry, a pistol. He had called in airstrikes with coordinates so precise that the pilots later said it was like having a spotter sitting on their wing. And when the extraction team finally reached him, when the sun came up over those blood-soaked mountains, they had found him still holding his position, still covering the bodies of his fallen brothers, still refusing to leave until every last one of them was loaded onto a helicopter. The Silver Star citation had called it extraordinary heroism. The men who served with him had called it something else. They had called it Shepard being Shepard. Delphine slowed as she approached the crowd. Her breath came hard and her heart pounded against her ribs, but her eyes were fixed on a man on the bench. The threadbare jacket, the weathered face, the way he held himself even now, even after 15 years of whatever had happened to him, with that unconscious precision she remembered from the radio calls. It was him. She was certain of it now. The man Captain Holt was trying to arrest for trespassing was one of the most decorated special operations soldiers of his generation. Holt's voice cut through her thoughts, loud and defensive. "I do not care what name he gave you. I do not care what story he has constructed. This is a federal facility, and he is a vagrant, and I want him removed before the Secretary of Defense arrives for the ceremony." The Secretary of Defense. Delphine had forgotten. The Memorial Day address. The VIP section already being prepared near the tomb of the unknown soldier. Generals and senators and Gold Star families, all of them converging on Arlington in the next few hours. Captain Holt. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. Steady, commanding. The voice she had used for 30 years to make young soldiers listen. Holt turned, irritation flashing across his features. "I am handling this, Ms. Marchand. This does not concern your department. Delphine ignored him. She walked past the junior officers, past the gathered staff, until she was standing directly in front of the bench. The old man looked up at her, those steel-colored eyes meeting hers. Searching for something, she saw recognition flicker in his gaze. Not her face, but of what she was, what she had been. One soldier, seeing another across the distance of years and silence. Sergeant Whitmore. She said the name quietly, almost reverently. Is that you? The old man's expression did not change, but something shifted in those eyes. A wall coming down, a door opening just a crack. Nobody has called me that in a long time, ma'am. Behind her, Delphine heard Holt sputter. Sergeant? What are you talking about? This man is a homeless vagrant. He probably does not even know what a sergeant is. Delphine did not turn around. She kept her eyes on Ezra's face, on the map of years and pain written there. She thought about the voice on the radio. The man who had held a position alone against impossible odds. The man who had carried his dying brother to cover and then gone back out to fight. I processed your Silver Star citation, she said softly. March 2007. Kidder Province. Operation Resolute Fury. She paused, watching his face. I also processed the Medal of Honor citation for Sergeant First Class Tobias Okonkwo. I know what happened in that valley. I know what you did. Ezra's hand moved to his chest, to the dog tags beneath his shirt. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. Then you know I did not do enough. You know he died anyway. Delphine felt tears prick at her eyes. She had read hundreds of citations in her career, had processed the paperwork for hundreds of heroes. But something about this man, this broken warrior sitting on a bench outside the gates of the cemetery where his brother lay buried, cut through every layer of professional distance she had built. You carried 3 wounded men to cover while under sustained fire, she said. You held a position alone for 6 hours. You called in the airstrikes that saved the rest of your team. She reached out slowly and placed her hand on his shoulder. The threadbare fabric was thin enough that she could feel the bone beneath. You did everything humanly possible, everything and more. Behind her, the crowd had gone silent. Even Holt had stopped talking, his mouth hanging open as he tried to process what he was hearing. Delphine turned to face him. Her voice carried across the parking lot like a verdict. Captain Holt, the man you have been trying to arrest is a Silver Star recipient. He served 4 combat tours with 5th Special Forces Group. He was part of the same action that earned Sergeant Okonkwo the Medal of Honor. She paused, letting the words sink in. And right now, you are standing between him and the grave of the man who gave his life to save him. The silence that followed was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The morning sun crested the trees along the cemetery wall, flooding the parking lot with golden light that caught the tears now streaming freely down Ezra Whitmore's weathered face. And in that silence, in that light, the gates of Arlington National Cemetery began to open. The gates swung open with a sound like a held breath finally released. Beyond them, the white headstones of Arlington stretched in perfect rows across rolling green hills, each one a life given, a story ended, a family forever changed. The morning sun cast long shadows across the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a groundskeeper's truck rumbled along a service road. Ezra did not move. He sat on the bench, tears still wet on his face, watching the gates open the way a man watches a door he is not sure he is allowed to walk through. Delphine's hand remained on his shoulder. She could feel him trembling beneath her palm, not from cold, not from weakness, from something deeper. The kind of trembling that comes when walls built over 15 years begin to crack and crumble. The gates are open, Sergeant. Her voice was gentle. You could go see him now. Ezra's eyes moved from the gates to Delphine's face. Up close, she could see the full map of his years on the streets. The weathered skin, the broken blood vessels, the gray beard that had not seen a proper trim in what looked like a decade. But his eyes were the same ones she remembered from the citation photographs. Steel and sorrow and something unbreakable underneath. I know what you did for him, Delphine said quietly. I know you carried him. I know you held him for 3 days. I know you took the flag when there was no one else to take it. Ezra's jaw tightened. His hand found the dog tags again. The gesture was automatic, unconscious, a rosary for a man who had forgotten how to pray. "I failed him," he said. The words came out broken, rough, like stones dragged across gravel. "He told me to go home, to live, to take care of Maria and Sophia. And I cannot do it. I cannot even do the one thing he asked." Behind them, Captain Holt had recovered enough to find his voice. "Now, wait just a minute." He stepped forward, face flushed, finger pointing. "I do not care what citations she claims to have processed. I do not care what stories you people are telling each other. This man is a vagrant. He spent the night trespassing on federal property. There are protocols. There are procedures." Delphine turned slowly. The look on her face made Holt's words die in his throat. "Captain," her voice was ice. "I spent 30 years in the United States Army. I retired as a sergeant major. I have processed more citations for valor than you have processed parking tickets. And I am telling you right now that if you say one more word about protocols while standing in front of a Silver Star recipient on Memorial Day morning, I will personally ensure that your career ends before lunch." The crowd behind Holt had grown larger. Staff members, early arriving families, a woman in a black dress clutching flowers, a man in a wheelchair with a Vietnam veteran cap. They were all watching, all listening, and the expressions on their faces had shifted from curiosity to something else, something that looked like anger directed squarely at the captain. Holt's mouth opened and closed. He looked around for support and found none. Even his junior officers had taken a step back, distancing themselves from whatever was about to happen. Marcus Webb pushed through the crowd, his phone in his hand. He had been filming. Not the whole time, but enough. Enough to capture Holt's accusations. Enough to capture Delphine's revelation. Enough to ensure that whatever happened next would not be buried or forgotten. "The gates are open," Marcus said quietly. He looked at Ezra with something like reverence. "You should go see your brother, sir." Ezra looked at the young groundskeeper, at the phone in his hand, at the crowd of faces watching him with expressions he had not seen directed at himself in 15 years. Respect, compassion, recognition of something valuable that had been hidden in plain sight. He stood slowly. His joints protested. His back ached from a night on the iron bench. The shrapnel scars along his side pulled tight, as they always did when he moved too quickly. But he stood, straight, shoulders back, the posture of a soldier rising for duty. Delphine watched the transformation with tears in her eyes. One moment, he was a homeless man in a threadbare jacket. The next, he was something else entirely. The years fell away. The grime and the wear and the visible marks of his long penance seemed to fade. And underneath, just for a moment, she could see the warrior he had been, the shepherd who had held the line. Ezra took a step toward the gates. Then another. The crowd parted before him without being asked. The woman with the flowers pressed her hand to her heart. The Vietnam veteran in the wheelchair raised a trembling hand to his brow in salute. And then Ezra stopped. He turned back to face Captain Holt, who stood frozen in place, face pale, eyes wide with the dawning realization of how badly he had miscalculated. Ezra's voice was quiet, but in the silence of the morning, it carried to every ear. "You were right about one thing, Captain." His hand moved to the collar of his jacket, fingers finding the faded patch that marked him as 5th Special Forces Group. "This place is sacred. Every man and woman buried behind these gates gave something that cannot be measured or repaid." He paused, letting the words settle. "But you were wrong about something else. You were wrong about who belongs here and who does not." He reached beneath his shirt and pulled out the dog tags. Both sets. His own, worn smooth from years of touching, and Toby's, still wrapped in electrical tape, still silent, still resting against his heart. "I belong here, Captain, because part of me is already buried in that ground. Has been for 15 years. He turned away from Holt's stricken face, turned toward the open gates and the white headstones and the grave that had been waiting for him since dawn. And as he walked through those gates, as his worn boots touched the sacred soil of Arlington National Cemetery, somewhere behind him a woman began to cry. Then another, because they understood now. They all understood. Some men carry their dead with them everywhere they go, and some men are brave enough to visit them. The path to Section 60 wound through the heart of Arlington like a pilgrimage route worn smooth by decades of grieving footsteps. Ezra walked it alone, though he could feel the eyes of the crowd still watching from the gates. Delphine had wanted to accompany him. Marcus had offered to show him the way. But this walk was something he needed to make by himself. Had always made by himself. 15 years of solitary pilgrimages to the only appointment he ever kept. The headstones passed in rows of perfect, white geometry. Names and dates and ranks. Husbands and wives and children. Wars that spanned a century. Each stone a universe of grief compressed into marble and silence. Ezra knew the path by heart. Left at the old oak tree with the split trunk. Right at the stone bench where he had once seen a mother sit for 6 hours without moving. Straight past the grave of a general he had served under briefly in Iraq. The geography of loss mapped onto his bones. Section 60 was different from the rest of Arlington. Newer. The grass still fighting to establish itself over some of the graves. The stones marking the forever young. Iraq. Afghanistan. The forever wars that had consumed so many of the men and women Ezra had served beside. He slowed as he approached row 14. His heart hammered against his ribs. His hands trembled at his sides. 15 years of this walk, and it never got easier. The sight of that white stone rising from the green grass still hit him like a fist to the chest every single time. Tobias Okonkwo, Sergeant First Class, United States Army, Medal of Honor, March 14, 1978, March 17, 2007. Greater love has no one than this, that he laid down his life for his friends. Ezra stopped 3 feet from the headstone, the same distance he always stopped, close enough to touch, far enough to see the whole of it, the whole of what remained of Tobias Okonkwo in this world. Hey, brother. His voice cracked on the words. Been a year. He lowered himself slowly to his knees. The grass was wet with morning dew. It soaked through his worn pants immediately, but he did not notice, did not care. He had knelt in worse. Had knelt in blood and mud and the ashes of burned villages. Wet grass was nothing. I know I say this every year, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. But I am sorry. I am sorry I cannot save you. I am sorry I cannot keep my promise to you. I am sorry I failed Maria and Sophia the way I failed you. The headstone did not answer. It never did. But Ezra kept talking anyway. The words he had stored up over 12 months of silence. The confessions he could only make to the dead. I'm still on the streets, Toby. Still cannot bring myself to go inside anywhere. Still cannot accept help from anyone. He paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I know what you would say. You would say I am being stupid. You would say that surviving is not betraying you. You would say that you did not die, so I could waste the life you saved. A bird sang somewhere in the branches above him. The morning sun warmed the back of his neck. The world continued its turning, indifferent to the grief of one old man kneeling before a stone. I saw them, you know. Ezra's voice dropped even lower. 3 years ago, Sophia graduated from Georgetown. Law school, top of her class. I watched from across the street. Did not let her see me. His hand found a photograph in his pocket. The laminated one. The one with 2 faces and a mud-walled compound. She looked so much like Maria. So beautiful. So strong. You would have been so proud. He pulled out the photograph and held it up to the headstone. As if Toby could see it. As if the dead could look through stone and time and see the faces of those they had loved. Maria remarried, he said, 4 years ago. A good man. A teacher. I followed them for a while, just to make sure he was treating her right. He is. He makes her laugh. He paused, his voice breaking. I cannot make her laugh anymore, Toby. After you died, I cannot make anyone laugh. I cannot even make myself get out of bed. The grief came in waves now. 15 years of compressed sorrow breaking through the dam he had built around it. His shoulders shook. His breath came in ragged gasps. The tears fell onto the grass before the headstone, watering the ground where his brother lay. I want to die, Toby, for a long time after. I wanted to follow you. Wanted to find you wherever you went and tell you I was sorry in person. He pressed his forehead against the cold stone of the headstone. The only thing that stopped me was you. That last order you gave me. You get home and you live. That is an order. He laughed, a broken sound with no humor in it. I have not really lived, brother. I know that. Existing is not living. Surviving is not thriving. But I'm still here, still trying. That has to count for something, right? That has to mean something. The morning stretched on. The sun climbed higher. Somewhere in the distance, Ezra could hear the sounds of Arlington coming to life. Cars in the parking lot, voices at the visitor center, the machinery of Memorial Day grinding into motion. But here, in Section 60, Row 14, there was only silence. Only an old man on his knees before a white stone. Only the weight of 15 years of grief and guilt and desperate, stubborn survival. Ezra reached into his pocket and pulled out the worn paperback. Marcus Aurelius. The margins filled with Toby's handwriting. He opened it to a random page and began to read aloud, his voice steadying as the familiar words washed over him. Never value anything as profitable that compels you to break your promise. Lose your self-respect. Hate any man, suspect, curse, act the hypocrite, or desire anything that needs walls or curtains. Toby had underlined that passage 3 times, had drawn a small star beside it, had written in the margin, "This is who I want to be." Ezra closed the book and pressed it against his chest. This is who you were, brother. This is exactly who you were. He did not know how long he knelt there. Did not know that back at the gates something was happening. Did not know that a woman had arrived. A woman with Toby's eyes and Toby's smile, searching for a grave she visited every year. Did not know that in the next hour, everything was about to change again. Senator Adiz Okonkwo Foster arrived at Arlington National Cemetery in a black town car with tinted windows and a small American flag mounted on the hood. She was 51 years old, elegant in a charcoal dress and pearls, her hair twisted into braids that crowned her head like a wreath. She had been coming to this place every Memorial Day for 5 years, ever since a genealogy search had revealed the brother she never knew existed. The brother who had been given up for adoption before she was born. The brother who had grown up in foster care while she grew up in a loving home with parents who never told her the truth. The brother who had died a hero in a country she could not find on a map, 17 years before she learned his name. She stepped out of the car and paused, taking in the scene at the main gates. A crowd had gathered. People were talking in urgent whispers. A security captain stood off to the side, his face the color of old paper, while a woman in civilian clothes appeared to be directing traffic with the authority of a general. What is happening here? The senator's voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to being answered. Delphine Marchand turned. She recognized the senator immediately, had seen her at the Memorial Day ceremony for the past 3 years, had watched her place flowers on a grave in Section 60 and stand there for hours, mourning a brother she had never met. Senator Okonkwo Foster. Delphine's voice was careful, measured. There has been an incident this morning. A man was found sleeping on the bench outside the gates. Captain Holt attempted to have him removed. The senator's brow furrowed. And this required a crowd of this size? Delphine hesitated. The man, she said slowly, is a veteran. He served with your brother. He was there when your brother died. The words hit the senator like a physical blow. She took a step backward, her hand reaching for the car door to steady herself. Her brother, the brother she had spent 5 years trying to know through military records and citation documents and the cold marble of a headstone. What do you mean he was there? Her voice had dropped to barely a whisper. Who is he? His name is Ezra Whitmore. He was a staff sergeant with 5th Special Forces Group, the same unit as your brother. Delphine paused, watching the senator's face. He received the Silver Star for the same action that earned your brother the Medal of Honor. He carried your brother to cover after he was wounded. He held his hand for 3 days in the hospital at Bagram. The senator's eyes filled with tears. She had read the citation, had memorized every word of the official account. But the official account had not included names, had not told her who had been there, who had witnessed her brother's final moments. who might be able to tell her something, anything, about the man Tobias Okonkwo had been. Where is he now? The words came out broken. Desperate. Delphine pointed toward the cemetery. Section 60. Row 14. He walked through the gates about 20 minutes ago. He visits every Memorial Day. Has been visiting for 15 years. The senator was already moving. Her security detail scrambled to follow, but she waved them off. This was not a moment for entourages. This was not a moment for protocol. This was a moment she had been waiting for since the day she learned she had a brother who had died before she could ever know him. She walked through the gates of Arlington with her heart pounding against her ribs. The white headstones stretched before her in endless rows, but she did not see them. She saw only the path to Section 60, the path she had walked so many times, the path that led to the only piece of her brother she had left. As she approached row 14, she saw him, an old man kneeling before a headstone, his forehead pressed against the marble, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He wore a threadbare army jacket and pants soaked with morning dew. His gray hair was unkempt. His boots were held together with tape and prayer. He looked like a man who had given up on everything except this. This one grave. This one vigil. This one unbreakable appointment with the dead. The senator stopped 10 feet away. Her throat had closed around the words she wanted to say. For 5 years, she had talked to a headstone, had poured out her grief and her questions and her desperate longing to know the brother she had missed. And now, kneeling before that same headstone, was someone who could answer her, someone who had known Tobias Okonkwo as more than a name on a wall. The old man sensed her presence. He lifted his head slowly, turning to look at her with eyes the color of weathered steel, eyes that had seen things she could not imagine, eyes that carried a weight she could not comprehend. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The morning sun fell between them, illuminating the white headstone with golden light. The name Tobias Okonkwo carved into the marble like a bridge between two strangers. Then the senator saw it, the old man's eyes moving across her face, the sudden stillness in his expression, the way his breath caught in his throat. He saw it too, the resemblance she carried without knowing. The eyes, the shape of the jaw, the way she held herself. The ghost of Tobias Okonkwo looking out from a face he had never seen before. You look like him. The old man's voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from disuse and tears. You have his eyes. The senator felt the tears spill down her cheeks. She had never heard those words before, had never had anyone tell her she resembled the brother she had never met. The brother who had died before she could ever see his face except in photographs. I am Adiz, she said. Her voice trembled. Tobias was my brother. I did not know he existed until 5 years ago. I never got to meet him. The old man's face crumbled. Whatever walls he had left, whatever defenses he had rebuilt during his solitary vigil, collapsed completely. He pressed his hand against the headstone as if to steady himself, as if the marble were the only solid thing left in a world that had suddenly tilted off its axis. He used to talk about the family he wished he had, the old man said. The words came out ragged, torn from somewhere deep. He said if he ever had a sister, he would have wanted her to be strong, to be brave, to be someone who made a difference in the world. The senator took a step closer, then another, until she was standing beside the kneeling man, looking down at the headstone that bore her brother's name. Did he know about me? The question she had carried for 5 years. The question that haunted her every time she visited this grave. Did he know I existed? The old man shook his head slowly. He did not know, but I think he would have been proud. He looked up at her, tears streaming down his weathered face. I think he would have been so proud of you. The senator lowered herself to her knees beside him. The wet grass soaked through her charcoal dress. She did not care. She knelt before her brother's grave beside the man who had held him as he died, and she finally asked the question that had burned in her heart for 5 years. Please, she whispered, tell me about him. Tell me who my brother was. Ezra looked at the woman kneeling beside him and saw Toby's eyes looking back. The same warm brown, the same quiet intensity, the same spark of something unbreakable underneath. 15 years of visiting this grave alone, and now Toby's sister knelt beside him, asking him to resurrect a man from memory and words. He did not know where to begin. How do you describe a man who changed your life? How do you compress a brotherhood forged in blood and fire into sentences that a stranger can understand? He was the best of us, Ezra said finally. His voice was rough, and used to speaking this much, and used to sharing what he had kept locked away for so long. From the first day I met him, I knew he was different. Special, not because of what he could do, though he could do things that made the rest of us look like amateurs, but because of who he was inside. The senator listened without interrupting. Her hands were folded in her lap, pressed against the wet fabric of her dress. Her eyes never left Ezra's face. He grew up with nothing, Ezra continued. 11 foster homes before he aged out of the system. No family, no roots, no one who claimed him. But he never let that make him bitter, never let it make him hard. He used to say that he was going to build the family he never had, that he was going to find his people and hold on to them so tight that nothing could ever tear them apart. Ezra's hand found the photograph in his pocket. He pulled it out and held it between them, the laminated faces catching the morning light. This was taken 3 weeks before he died. See that grin? He wore that grin every single day. Did not matter if we were walking into a firefight or sitting around playing cards. Did not matter if he was exhausted or scared or hurting. That grin was his gift to the world. The senator reached out slowly and touched the photograph. Her fingers traced her brother's face, the brother she had never met, the brother who had died with that grin still on his face. He found his family, Ezra said softly. My family. My wife Maria used to set an extra plate at every dinner because she knew Toby would show up. My daughter Sophia climbed into his lap the first time she met him and declared he was her uncle. He paused, his voice catching. He was not just my teammate. He was not just my brother in arms. He was my brother. Period. The only one I have ever had. The senator wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The mascara ran, but she did not care. Tell me about the day he died, she whispered. Tell me what happened. Ezra closed his eyes. The memories he had been running from for 15 years rose up like floodwaters. But this time, instead of drowning in them, he let them carry him, let them flow through him and out of him, offering them up to the sister who needed to know. March 14th, 2007. Quito Province. We were on a routine patrol that turned into an ambush. They hit us from 3 sides. Hernandez and Doyle went down in the first 30 seconds. I took shrapnel to my right side and left leg. Could not walk. Could barely breathe. He opened his eyes and looked at the headstone. At Toby's name carved into the white marble. Your brother came back for me. I was lying in the open, bleeding out, and he came back. He got hit in the shoulder on the way. Did not stop. Got hit in the thigh. Did not stop. Got hit twice more in the chest and abdomen while he was dragging me to cover. For bullets, and he still got me behind that wall. The senator's hand had moved to her mouth. Tears streamed freely down her face. I told him to stay down. Told him the position was lost. Told him we just had to hold until extraction arrived. But Toby looked at me with those eyes, your eyes, and he said, not leaving you, Shep. Not ever. And then he went back out. Ezra's voice cracked, but he kept going. The words needed to be said. The story needed to be told. For himself. For the senator. For the man whose grave they knelt before. There was a machine gun position on the ridge. It had us pinned. Toby grabbed the last 2 grenades we had and ran straight at it. Straight into the fire. I screamed at him to stop. Screamed until my throat tore. But he did not look back. He just ran. He paused, reliving the moment. The flash of the explosions. The sudden silence of the machine gun. The sight of Toby collapsing in the dust with a 5th bullet in his spine. He took out that position. Save what was left of our team. Save me. And I crawled to him, dragging my useless legs behind me, and I held him in that dirt until the medevac arrived. The senator was sobbing now. Quiet, shaking sobs that came from somewhere deeper than grief. Ezra reached out and took her hand. Her fingers closed around his with desperate strength. He lived for 3 days after that. 3 days in the hospital epigram. I did not leave his side. Did not eat. Did not sleep. just held his hand and talked to him about everything and nothing. About the restaurant he was going to open, about the family he had found, about the sister he did not even know he had. Ezra squeezed her hand gently. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. On the third morning, he woke up, just for a moment, long enough to look at me with those eyes and give me one last order. You get home, Shep. You get home and you live. That is an order. His voice broke completely, and then he was gone. And I have been trying to follow that order ever since. Trying and failing, but still trying. The senator leaned forward and wrapped her arms around the old man. He stiffened for a moment, and used a touch, and used a comfort, and used the simple kindness of human contact. Then his walls collapsed completely. He buried his face in her shoulder and wept. 15 years of held grief pouring out in ragged, broken sobs. They knelt there together before the headstone. The senator holding the man who had held her brother as he died. Two strangers bound together by love for the same ghost. The morning sun warm on their backs. The white marble gleaming before them. And somewhere, if the dead can see, Tobias Okonkwo watched his sister and his brother finally find each other. Exactly as he would have wanted. The crowd at the main gates had swelled to nearly 100 people by the time word began to spread. Staff members whispered to arriving families. Families whispered to other families. Phones emerged from pockets and purses, fingers flying across screens, sharing the story that was unfolding in Section 60. A homeless veteran, a Medal of Honor grave, a Silver Star recipient who had been sleeping on a bench, a security captain who had tried to arrest him, a senator kneeling in the wet grass. Marcus Webb stood at the edge of the crowd, his phone still recording, his eyes fixed on the distant figures in row 14. He had served 2 years in the Army, had never seen combat, had never done anything that would earn him a citation or a medal. But he knew enough to recognize what he was witnessing. He knew enough to understand that some moments were sacred. Delphine Marchand had positioned herself between the crowd and the path to Section 60, turning away anyone who tried to approach. "This is not a spectacle," she said firmly to a man with a camera around his neck. "This is a reunion. Give them space." Captain Holt had disappeared into the security station an hour ago and had not emerged since. His junior officers milled about uncertainly, unsure of their duties, unsure of their loyalties, unsure of everything they had believed about the man who had been their commander. And then a black SUV pulled into the parking lot, followed by 2 more. The doors opened and men in suits emerged, their eyes scanning the crowd with professional precision. Behind them, stepping out of the middle vehicle with the bearing of a man accustomed to command, came Lieutenant General Harold Vance, United States Army, retired. He was 73 years old, silver-haired, ramrod straight despite the years. He had commanded Joint Special Operations Command during some of the most intense years of the war in Afghanistan. He had signed commendations for men whose names would never appear in any public record. He had attended more funerals than he could count, and he had received a phone call 30 minutes ago from Senator Okonkwo Foster that had made him order his driver to break every speed limit between his home and Arlington. "Where is he?" The general's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. "Where is Sergeant Whitmore?" Delphine stepped forward. "Section 60, sir. Row 14. He is with the senator." The general nodded once. His eyes swept across the crowd, taking in the phones, the cameras, the faces turned toward him with recognition. Then his gaze settled on the security station, where a pale face watched from behind the window. "Is that the captain who tried to have him arrested?" "Yes, sir. Captain Raymond Holt." The general's expression did not change, but something in his eyes went cold. "Have him report to the cemetery director's office. Immediately. He is relieved of duty pending a full investigation." Delphine felt a grim satisfaction settle in her chest. "Yes, sir." The general turned and began walking towards Section 60. His security detail moved to follow, but he waved them back. This too was a journey that needed to be made alone. He found them kneeling together before the headstone. The senator in her charcoal dress, now stained with grass and mud. The old man in his threadbare jacket, his face wet with tears, his hand still clutching the photograph of two soldiers in front of a mud-walled compound. The general stopped 10 feet away. He removed his cap and held it against his chest. For a long moment, he simply stood there, looking at the name on the headstone. Tobias Okonkwo, a name he remembered signing on a Medal of Honor recommendation. A name that had cost him sleep for years afterward, wondering if he could have done something different, something better, something that would have brought that young sergeant home alive. Shepard. The old man's head came up slowly. His steel-colored eyes found the general's face, and something flickered in them. Recognition. Memory. The echo of a voice giving orders through static and gunfire. General Vance. Ezra's voice was hoarse. "It has been a long time, sir. Too long." The general stepped forward and extended his hand. Ezra looked at it for a moment, then took it. The handshake was firm, solid. Two soldiers greeting each other across the distance of years and rank. "I signed your Silver Star citation," the general said. "March 2007. I remember reading the after-action report and thinking that I had never seen anything like it. A man holding a position alone for 6 hours, calling in airstrikes with shrapnel in his side, refusing extraction until every one of his brothers was accounted for." Ezra's jaw tightened. "I was just doing my job, sir." "No." The general's voice was firm. "You were doing something far beyond any job. You were being exactly what your call sign promised. A shepherd protecting his flock." The senator had risen to her feet, watching this exchange with tears still wet on her face. General Vance turned to her and inclined his head respectfully. "Senator, I am sorry we are meeting again under these circumstances, but I'm glad you found him." He gestured toward Ezra. "This man has been a ghost for 15 years. We have been looking for him, wanting to help him, but he disappeared so completely that even our best people could not find him." Ezra looked away. "I did not want to be found, sir." "I know." The general moved to stand beside Ezra, looking down at the headstone. "I know you have been carrying this weight alone. I know you have been punishing yourself for surviving." He paused, his voice softening. "But Tobias Okonkwo did not die, so you could waste a life he saved. He died so you could live it." Ezra's hand found the dog tags beneath his shirt. "Both sets. His and Toby's. That is what everyone keeps telling me, sir. Because it is true." The general turned to face him fully. "I have seen a lot of men break under the weight of survivor's guilt. Good men, strong men, men who could not forgive themselves for coming home when their brothers did not." His eyes locked onto Ezra's. "But I have never seen a man carry that weight alone for 15 years and still show up, still keep the appointment, still honor the fallen." Ezra's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I did not know what else to do, sir. I did not know how else to keep my promise to him." The general reached out and placed his hand on Ezra's shoulder. The same gesture Delphine had made hours earlier. But from a 3-star general, from a man who had commanded the most elite warriors in the world, it carried a different weight. "You have kept your promise, Sergeant. Every day you have survived. Every Memorial Day you have shown up. Every time you chose to keep breathing when everything in you wanted to stop." The general's voice broke slightly. "You have honored Tobias Okonkwo more than any medal ever could." The three of them stood together before the headstone. A senator who had found her brother too late. A general who had sent too many young men to their deaths. And a homeless veteran who had finally been seen. The morning sun climbed higher over Arlington. And somewhere in the distance, a bugler began to play. The Memorial Day ceremony began at 1100 hours with the precision that Arlington demanded. Rows of white folding chairs filled the amphitheater near the tomb of the unknown soldier. Generals and senators and Gold Star families took their seats beneath a sky so blue it seemed painted. The Secretary of Defense stood at the podium, prepared to deliver remarks about sacrifice and service and the debt the living owe to the dead. But the story rippling through the crowd had nothing to do with the prepared speeches. Did you hear about the homeless man at the gates? A Silver Star recipient, sleeping on a bench for 15 years. He knew the Medal of Honor soldier. Held him when he died. The whispers spread like wildfire through the assembled dignitaries. Phones buzzed with messages. Eyes kept drifting toward Section 60, where a small group still stood before a single headstone. General Vance had made a decision. He had spoken quietly with the Secretary of Defense, had shown him the video that Marcus Webb had captured, had explained who Ezra Whitmore was and what Captain Holt had tried to do. The Secretary's face had gone through several colors before settling on a grim determination. "Bring him here," the Secretary had said. "Bring him to the ceremony. This is a story that needs to be told." And so Delphine Marchand walked back to Section 60 with an invitation that Ezra Whitmore did not want to accept. "I am not here for ceremonies," he said. His voice was tired. 15 years of exhaustion finally catching up with him. "I am here for Toby. That is all." The senator took his hand. "Toby would want you to be recognized. You know he would. He always said you never took credit for anything, that you deflected every compliment like it was incoming fire." Ezra almost smiled. "That sounds like him. Come with us." General Vance's voice was gentle but firm. "Not for the cameras. Not for the politicians. Come because Tobias Okonkwo's story deserves to be told in full. And you're the only one who can tell it." Ezra looked down at the headstone, at the name carved into white marble, at the words etched beneath, "Greater love has no one than this." He thought about all the memorial days he had spent alone, all the years of watching the ceremonies from a distance, never feeling worthy to join them, all the times he had told himself that his survival was a betrayal, that his presence among the honored would be an insult to those who had given everything. But Toby's sister was holding his hand. A 3-star general was asking for his story. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered, "You get home and you live." That is an order. "Okay," Ezra said quietly. "For Toby. I will do it for Toby." The walk from Section 60 to the amphitheater felt like the longest march of his life. Longer than any patrol through hostile territory. Longer than the 6 hours he had held that position alone. Every step carried the weight of 15 years of hiding, 15 years of believing he did not deserve to be seen. The crowd at the amphitheater parted as they approached. Whispers turned to silence. Hundreds of faces turned toward the old man in the threadbare jacket, walking between a senator and a general like a ghost finally made flesh. The Secretary of Defense had paused his remarks. He stood at the podium, watching Ezra approach with an expression that mixed solemnity with something that looked almost like awe. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Secretary said into the microphone, "I am going to depart from my prepared remarks, because something has happened this morning that embodies everything Memorial Day is supposed to mean." He gestured toward Ezra, who had stopped at the edge of the seated crowd, unwilling to go further, overwhelmed by the attention he had spent 15 years avoiding. "This man is Master Sergeant Ezra Whitmore, United States Army, retired. Call sign Shepard. He served 4 combat tours with 5th Special Forces Group. He received the Silver Star for actions in Khyber Province, Afghanistan, in March of 2007. The crowd was utterly silent. Not a cough, not a whisper, not a single phone being raised. On that day, the Secretary continued, Sergeant Whitmore was wounded by shrapnel during an ambush. Despite his injuries, he held a position alone for 6 hours, calling in airstrikes, protecting his wounded teammates, refusing extraction until every one of his brothers was accounted for. His actions saved multiple lives and turned the tide of the engagement. Ezra's eyes had found the ground. He could not look at the faces watching him, could not bear the weight of their attention. But that is not why I'm telling you about him today. The Secretary's voice softened. I am telling you about him because of what happened after, because of the weight he has carried, because of the brother he lost. The Secretary looked toward the Senator, who nodded slightly. Sergeant First Class Tobias Okonkwo received the Medal of Honor posthumously for his actions that same day. He was shot 5 times while carrying Sergeant Whitmore to safety. He destroyed an enemy machine gun position with his bare hands and 2 grenades. He died 3 days later at Bagram Airfield. The Secretary paused, and Sergeant Whitmore held his hand as he passed. A woman in the front row began to weep. Then another. The sound of quiet crying spread through the crowd like a wave. For 15 years, the Secretary said, Sergeant Whitmore has come to Arlington every Memorial Day. He sleeps on a bench outside the gates, so he can be first through when they open. First to visit his brother's grave. First to honor the man who gave his life to save him. The secretary stepped away from the podium and walked toward Ezra. He stopped directly in front of the old man and extended his hand. This morning, a security captain tried to have Sergeant Whitmore arrested for trespassing. Called him a disgrace. Accused him of stolen valor. The secretary's voice carried across the silent amphitheater. That captain has been relieved of his duties. But I want to make something clear to everyone here today. He took Ezra's weathered hand in both of his own. This man is not a disgrace. This man is what service looks like when the cameras are gone and the medals are put away. This man is what sacrifice looks like when it costs everything and no one is watching. The secretary's voice broke slightly. This man is exactly why we gather here every Memorial Day. To remember, to honor, to never forget. The secretary stepped back and raised his hand to his brow in a salute. Behind him, General Vance did the same. Then the senator. Then one by one, every veteran in the crowd. Every active duty service member. Every man and woman who had ever worn the uniform. They rose from their seats and saluted a homeless man in a threadbare jacket. A man who had been invisible for 15 years. A man who had finally been seen. Ezra stood frozen, tears streaming down his face, watching hundreds of hands rise to hundreds of brows. Watching the country that had forgotten him suddenly remember. And in his mind, clear as the day it was spoken, he heard Toby's voice one last time. That is what living looks like, Shep. That is exactly what I meant. 3 months later, the leaves on the old oak tree near Section 60 had begun to turn gold. Autumn came early to Arlington that year, painting the rolling hills in shades of amber and rust, softening the endless rows of white headstones with color that seemed almost like comfort. Ezra Whitmore walked the familiar path with steps that felt different now. Steadier, less weighted. He still wore the Army field jacket, though someone had sewn the torn seam and cleaned the fabric until the faded green looked almost respectable. His beard was trimmed. His boots were new, a gift from the senator that he had tried 3 times to refuse before finally accepting. He was not alone. Beside him walked Dr. Christine Adler, the psychiatrist who ran a specialized program for special operations veterans. She had found him 3 days after the Memorial Day ceremony, not with paperwork or bureaucracy, but with a cup of coffee and an open door. I am not here to fix you, she had said. I am here to walk beside you while you figure out how to fix yourself. It had taken him 2 weeks to show up at her program. 2 weeks of sleeping in the bed the senator had arranged for him in a small apartment near the cemetery. 2 weeks of waking up in the middle of the night, reaching for a bench that was not there, feeling lost in the softness of sheets and the silence of walls. But he had shown up, and then he had shown up again, and slowly, painfully, like blood returning to a limb that had been numb for years, he had begun to feel something other than guilt. The group met 3 times a week in a converted church basement. 12 men and 4 women, all of them carrying weights that civilians could not comprehend. Ezra had not spoken for the first month, had just sat in a circle, listening to others tell their stories, feeling the strange comfort of being surrounded by people who understood. Then one evening, without planning to, he had opened his mouth. My name is Ezra. Call sign was Shepherd. And I have been punishing myself for 15 years because my brother died, saving my life. The words had cracked something open. The same crack that had started on the bench outside Arlington, that had widened when the senator took his hand, that had broken completely when hundreds of veterans saluted him at the ceremony. But this time, the breaking did not feel like destruction. It felt like release. He visited Toby's grave every week now instead of once a year. Sometimes alone, sometimes with the senator who had become something like family, sometimes with Dr. Adler, who would stand at a respectful distance while he said the things he needed to say. Today, he had come alone. He knelt before the headstone and placed his hand against the cool marble, feeling the carved letters beneath his palm. Hey, brother. His voice was stronger now, less broken, still carrying grief, but grief that had been shared, examined, held up to the light. I have news. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph. Not the old one, worn soft with years of handling. A new one, glossy and sharp, taken just last week. Maria called me. He could hardly believe the words, even as he said them. After 15 years. She saw the video from Memorial Day, saw me on the news, and she called. The photograph showed two women standing on either side of an old man in an army field jacket. Maria, her hair gray now, but her smile unchanged. And Sophia, 33 years old, a lawyer just like her mother had always dreamed, with her father's eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. They did not hate me, Toby. I thought they would hate me. Thought they would have every right to hate me for leaving, for breaking, for not being strong enough to stay. But Sophia, she grabbed my hand and she said, "We never stopped looking for you, Dad. We never stopped hoping." Ezra's voice cracked, but he kept going. The tears fell freely now, but they were different tears. Cleaner, lighter. I'm having dinner with them next week. A real dinner. At Maria's house. She remarried, you know. A good man. A teacher. He said I am welcome anytime. Said any brother of Toby's is family to him too. Can you believe that? He never even met you, and he calls you family. He pressed his forehead against the headstone. The same gesture he had made 1,000 times. But it felt different now. Less like penance. More like prayer. I'm starting to understand what you meant, brother. That last order you gave me. You get home and you live. I thought living meant surviving. Thought it meant keeping my heart beating even when everything in me wanted it to stop. But that is not what you meant, is it? A bird sang in the branches of the old oak tree. The autumn sun warmed the back of Ezra's neck. The world continued its turning, but for the first time in 15 years, Ezra felt like he was turning with it. Living means letting people in. Living means accepting help. Living means forgiving yourself enough to receive love. He pressed his palm flat against Toby's name. I'm trying, brother. Really trying this time. Not just surviving. Actually trying to live. He stood slowly, his knees protesting less than they used to. The new boots were good. The regular meals were helping. The sleep, when it came, was deeper than it had been in years. I met someone at the group, he said. A woman. Navy veteran. Lost her whole team in a helicopter crash in Syria. She understands. Not everything. Nobody understands everything. But enough. He almost smiled. Her name is Ruth. You would like her. She does not take any of my nonsense. He touched the headstone one last time. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the worn paperback. Marcus Aurelius. He opened it to a page near the back, where Toby had written something in the margin that Ezra had not noticed until last month. The quote was underlined 3 times. When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. And beneath it, in Toby's familiar handwriting, this one is for you, Shep. For the morning when you are finally ready to hear it. Ezra read the word aloud, his voice steady, his heart full of something that felt almost like peace. I hear it now, brother. Finally, after all this time, I hear it. He closed the book and slipped it back into his pocket, next to the new photograph, next to the old one, next to the dog tags he still wore against his heart. Both sets, his and Toby's, together, always. Still here, brother, he whispered, still trying. And this time, I think I might actually make it. He turned and walked back along the path, through the golden leaves, past the endless rows of white stones, toward the gates of Arlington and the life waiting beyond them. A daughter who wanted her father back. A family that had never stopped hoping. A woman named Ruth who did not take any of his nonsense. And somewhere, in whatever place the honored dead go to rest, Tobias Okonkwo smiled that impossible grin and whispered words that only brothers can hear. Knew you would figure it out eventually. Shep, welcome home. If this story touched you today, if it reminded you that healing is possible even after the deepest wounds, we hope you will subscribe and join us for more stories like this one. And tell us in the comments, who is the person you carry with you? Whose memory keeps you going on the hardest days? Because that is what Memorial Day truly means. Not just remembering the dead, but honoring them by living, really living, the way they would have wanted us to.